As we start into turning bowls, a couple of things change. One, our grain direction has changed. Instead of running parallel to the axis of the lathe, like this bundle of straws, it'll be perpendicular to the axis of the lathe. So our tools need to change. Since I'm turning perpendicular to the axis of the lathe, I need a much stronger tool than a spindle tool. Therefore, we have longer handles on bowl gouges, deeper flutes on bowl gouges than spindle gouges, and we do not use the famous spindle roughing gouge for turning bowls. This is for spindle work only. One of the biggest problems new turners have is they think this is a roughing gouge, not a spindle roughing gouge, and they use it to rough out all their blanks. As that wood's coming around, those end grain fibers are coming around, it takes a much stronger tool. This tool, the way it's manufactured, is it's forged from a piece of flat stock, and it has a tang. And that tang is very thin and very weak. And when that end grain comes around, and you have a catch, one of two things is going to happen. It's either going to kick the tool out at you and possibly hurt you. The other thing is it could bend. Now the scary part is after the first bend, as a lot of wood turners look at that and say, all I need is a heavy object and I could straighten that up, and I just happen to have one right in front of me. And they get that back to straightened up, and then they try the same cut that caused this in the first place, and then the tool breaks. Now I've got a 6-inch blade flying through my shop, sharpened on 2 ends. If you get in the way of that, you will be visiting your local hospital for some stitches. So let's use our bowl gouges instead of our spindle roughing gouges. You'll also notice as I turn the bowls, and as I've been turning the spindle projects even, there's a line down the center of my tools. And that lets you know which direction I've got the tool pointing so that you can see that better on camera. However, one thing here while we're working on bowls, this red line down the bottom of the flute, I will never be able to see that with my cuts. If I've got that flute closed, I can't see that. It's not going to allow as much wood into the cutting edge of the tool. If I've got that flute, that red line up and visible, I've got an awful lot of my wing exposed to the wood, and that would be a problem. And a simple rule to remember that by is red is dead. When you can see that red line, you're ready for a catch. And so it's either about to happen or it's happening. You don't want to have that red line exposed. Keep that covered up. And as we go through this bowl, we'll talk about that a little bit further. Many times you'll see me reach over and pick up a tool. Just because it's came off of this bench doesn't mean it's been used. I am constantly sharpening my tools even though I don't have a grinder here with me. I will often refer to the fact that I am using a fresh edge or a freshly sharpened edge. Keep in mind, one problem that all of us have is we probably don't sharpen enough. Anytime I feel any resistance to the tool and it doesn't want to just glide through the wood, I know I have a dull edge and it's time to sharpen. And the more you work at this craft of wood turning, the more you'll find that you're sharpening more frequently and you'll appreciate a fresh edge. This next project is going to be a dry bowl. Now as I look at this piece of wood, I know I've got another piece of silver maple here, and as I look at it, I'm looking to see if there's any grain or anything that really pops out. This piece isn't showing me anything spectacular right now. I also want to look and see if there's any natural voids or flaws that I may not want in the rim of the piece that I might be able to turn away into the shape of the bowl. This is pretty basic, even across there. I might have a little bit of curl here. So I'm going to take that chance that I might have a little bit of curl, and I'm going to put this in the bottom of my blank, or the bottom of my bowl, and put my rim on the opposite side of the figure. Anytime you've got figure, you're going to want to put that in the bottom of your bowl because that's where it'll show up. If I had the most beautiful silver maple sitting here on top, that's going to turn into shavings and I'm going to lose all that. So I want my prettiest piece in the bottom, my prettiest figure in the bottom. I've got this piece already marked from the compass when it was cut round, so I know where center is. I'm going to mount up my screw center chuck, just like we have before. Same drill bit. Again, 300 to 400 RPMs, definitely not anything over 5. And a keynote here, don't try this with square bowls. When you've still got the corners on there, if you don't get your hands out of the way quick enough, they'll chew you up. Make sure your tool rest is out of the way. And don't hold on to that piece. Let the lathe take it away from you. Tighten that up. I'm going to bring my tailstock in. Set my tool rest for standard tool rest height. When the tool's level, I want the cutting tip to be at center line. Rotate that piece by hand, make sure it rotates freely, and then bring your lathe up to speed. Getting a little vibration there at 800, 900 it came out of it. Now my cut is going to be a little bit different than what I've been showing you. I've been showing you getting on the bevel, this bevel here, really quick and bringing that around. I'm going to start with a slightly different cut. I'm going to drop the handle, put my left hand on the rest, and over the top of the tool. As I ease in here, I can pick up a much larger cut. My right hand holds the tool firmly in my side, and I'm swinging with my hip and pivoting off of my front hand. My feet, shoulder width apart, again about 45 degrees from the axis of the lathe. My cutting edge is about a 45-degree angle from where it's intersecting the wood. If you've got that handle up high, you're going to get a scrape. And instead of those shavings peeling off like this, you're going to get dust and ribbons. You see how these are ribbons, not curls and shavings. Ribbons mean you're scraping, curls mean you're cutting. Now, this is kind of a brute force technique on a craft that elegance is key, but I'm just removing bulk wood. I'm going to take and color my bevel with red marker. And what we'll see from that is where the tool is riding the wood, or more importantly, where the bevel is riding the wood. I still have a bevel in contact when I'm doing this. If I don't remove any ink, that means I'm scraping. If I do remove the ink, I'm on the bevel. You can see that red ink is off of that bevel. So I am writing a bevel, I'm just not writing the nose bevel. Because I'm not writing the nose of the tool, it can leave me some torn out surface. But again, I'm just trying to get wood off of the blank and on the floor. If I can remove a lot of wood with very little effort, there is an elegance to that. Handle down, cutting edge 45 degrees, handle locked into my side, feet spread apart, nice stable platform, about 45-degree axis from the lathe, left hand anchored to the rest, and I'm coming in on that side grain fiber. And just pulling that through that side grain. Again, we're going to put a tenon. On this piece. Now let's stop right here for a second and let's talk about that. Why a tenon instead of an expansion or a spigot? The reason is a tenon is much stronger. Material in general, whether it's wood, steel, concrete, is much tougher in compression than tension. So when you're thinking about how things hold, if you take a pencil, for instance, a regular standard wood pencil, and you try and compress that, that's very difficult. But if you put it in tension, it breaks very easy. The same thing happens if I'm expanding into the foot of my piece here. Another thing happens while we're doing this. I've got two bowls here. One was held with a compression, one was held with an expansion. As they sit there, this one has a more elegant lift to it because it has a smaller footprint than this one. And then when you look from overhead, this one sits lower than this one. This one appears to be very thick sitting on the table because I've got to account for that room for the expansion. So I would much rather prefer to be holding on to something in compression and take the few minutes that it takes to remove that tenon later, because it's much safer on there, and I believe it leaves me with a much more elegant piece. We'll do a couple more cuts here. Rounded that up a bit and bring my RPM up, 1125. Now this step that you see me do, I'm going to ask you to do the same thing. What it does is it allows me to see the curve flow through the bowl. Most turners don't put that on there. And then they make a lot of handcrafted funnels. Handcrafted funnels are nice, but they're a lot tougher to give away than handcrafted bowls. So I'm using a couple of light shearing peel cuts to remove some of the bulk there. I can still see I've got a little bit of saw mark left here at the top, and this will be a good place to make a cut from the rim to the base backwards to refine the shape. Again, my smaller gouge, my 3/8 flute gouge with a fresh sharpened edge. I'm going to get just underneath that saw mark. If you notice now that flute's pointed away from me, I can't see that red line here. Just like before, coming the other direction. Just let that curve go out into space. I kind of lost it, so I'll come back, pick it up here, go a little bit faster curve, a little tighter. You notice the grip on the left hand, 3 fingers over the top, 1 behind, and the thumb behind. And I'm pushing the tool down into the tool rest. I don't want the bevel forced against the wood. The bevel on the tool has to be on the wood, but the wood shouldn't know it's there. It needs to float. Rubbing the bevel is a very harsh term for what that bevel needs to do. Now, as I look at this, as expected, on some of these end grain surfaces, I've got a little bit of torn grain there. So one side, there's my figure, nice little tight curl. We could see that earlier. So I'm going to come in, adjust my tool rest here. I'm going to clean up my tenon first with my 1/2-inch spindle gouge. And then I'm going to pick up and make one clean cut going from the base to the rim with my sharp 3/8 bowl gouge. Now, I'm cutting a dovetail, and my skew's ground in a dovetail. Doesn't it make sense to just stick that skew in there like that? It doesn't really, because when I come in with the skew, especially this direction, pointing across the axis of the lathe, I'm butting right into those end grain fibers. If I've got torn grain here on my tenon, it's not going to register into my chuck nice and smooth, and that'll throw me off more than I want to be. If I come in with my skew this way, it is an even grain surface. And by that, I'm cutting all side grain. A scraper works on an even grain surface, but here I've got end grain, side grain, end grain, side grain when I come in this way. And I don't want to hit that uneven grain surface. So if you're going to use your skew, come in from the tailstock on face grain work, come in from the tool rest on spindle work. I prefer to reach back and pick up my spindle gouge. Slide down that wall at about a 5 to 10 degree angle. 7's what I think my jaws are made at. Close the flute, scrape the wing, and verify that you've got a slightly undercut surface. Now I can pull my tailstock out of the way. Back to my 3/8, it still has a fresh edge on it. Feet, 45 degrees. Tool rest is up close when I start. As I end, I'll be a little further off. I can't see my red line. I am slightly open, but my red line doesn't show up to me. My left hand applies pressure down on the tool, rather an overhand grip or an underhand grip. I'm not pushing into the wood. In fact, if I push just slightly against the wood, listen, just my thumb on there, you can hear it dun, 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 as it hits that end grain and then the side grain. Side grain's much softer than the end grain. If you continue to push that bevel in hard as you're coming up a bowl like this, you'll start to pick up a little vibration, and you'll cut until it will no longer, the vibration gets so bad that you can no longer get on the tool, keep the tool on the wood. The only way to get rid of that bounce is to cut underneath it. Don't try and start on top of it. You've got to get back before it starts, get underneath on clean wood, sharpen your gouge, apply pressure straight down into the tool rest. Make the wood go through the tool rather than the tool go around the wood. That's left me with a pretty good surface on this piece, and we're ready to turn this one around. But before we do, a lot of people will sand this surface right now. It's very convenient. The reason I don't sand this right now is there's no guarantee that when I put this in the chuck, it'll be running dead true. And if it's not running dead true, and I want it to be dead true, then I've got a problem. I've got to sand or cut through what I've sanded. And that means I've wasted all of that time. So I'd much rather wait to sand until I'm all done cutting on this bowl. Tailstock's out of the way, tool rest and banjo are out of the way. Lock my spindle. Again, that edge can be sharp, so be careful of that. Remove my screw center. And put my chuck on. Again, got my grain lined up vertically, and I'm going to put that in line with my chuck key on this chuck. I know that keeps them in line. Then my jaws squeeze down evenly, come around, tighten up, equal pressure. Some woods are more brittle than others. Be careful as you're tightening these up when dry blanks. You can put enough tension on that tenon that it can actually crack that surface going through there, especially if you've got a chuck with a good set of dovetail jaws. I'm not bad, it's pretty close to true, but we'll go through and cut that one more time with the shear scrape just to refresh on how we did that. I've set up standard tool rest height for my 3/8 flute gouge. I'm going to develop the rim first, but we often see turners that hollow the center of the bowl out and then forget that they've got saw marks on the rim. Now I'm thin down in the bottom. They come out here and start to shape out on this area. The bowl can't support what they're doing. It flexes, starts vibration, becomes a chatter, and then explodes because it can't hold up to what is going on there. So the first thing I do when I turn the bowl around is I do the rim first. I'm bringing this up to speed, about 1125. Close my flute, handle down. My flute's slightly open, and I'm just stepping across that uneven surface. All of that control is coming from the left hand, and it's just squeezing my little finger and relaxing it. Then I'm going to come get a nice bevel writing cut, lay that bevel on the wood. I've got the tip of the tool at about a 45-degree angle, and swing the handle. Cut a shallow bead across the top of that, and that'll be my rim. As soon as I get a wall of wood in front of me, I stop. If I need to go deeper than that, I'll come back, pick up the cut again. So this is still all solid. This is now developed. I've got the rim that I want on this piece. At least I have it started. Let's shear scrape this outside. This is the same as what we did on our green bowl, but we're doing it with the dry. So again, rest is above center. Speed is the same as what I'd turn for the other cuts. I'm still at about 1125. Flute closed over, handle down low, and I'm trying to get the cutting edge as close to parallel as the cutting circle as I can. Now when I say the cutting circle, if I want to cut on that pencil line, I'm trying to get that cutting edge parallel to that. I don't want to be any more than about 70 degrees of an angle to it at the most. I want it, and the closer I get to running parallel to that, the finer the cut will be. Keep the handle in your side and down low. Light pressure against the wood. Good pressure against the tool into the rest. You don't want the tool to bounce on the rest. And if I start to feel a little bounce, I'll stop and back up and move. The instant that you feel you need to lift the tool to continue the cut around, it's time to move the rest. It'll take me 3 moves to get the length of this outside bowl, or the outside length of this bowl. A lot of turners like to use a heavier bowl gouge than a 3/8. They like at least a 1/2 inch flute with a very long side grind. And a lot of that is because they're typically reaching very far over the rest. By picking the rest up, I've shortened that distance. Knowing that a smaller, lighter tool will cut cleaner than a longer tool, and one with vibration, that allows me to use the 3/8 gouge instead of a 1/2 inch and having an extra gouge with a specialized grind on it. So I'm using my standard fingernail grind, but I do keep that rolled over. You can hear that tool bouncing where that bowl blank's just a little out of round. And we've got those nice, beautiful shavings coming off of that tool. Just super light and fluffy. If you've got your dust extraction running close to you, a lot of those shavings won't know which way to go. Fall to the ground or head to the dust collector. It's well worth spending a little extra time here to make sure that you get the shape and the finish right. Because after this, our next step will be sanding. And I really don't like to use an 80 grit gouge or a very coarse sandpaper. So I want to have a really nice finish. Tear out is my enemy here. I want to look and make sure I don't have any tear out. I don't have any tear out that I can see. Ridges don't bother me. I'll take the ridges any day over the tear out. There's some more of those really nice shavings. Now we'll come around. I'm going to set my tool rest, standard tool rest height. Again, I think I'll start with my 1/2 inch flute. I tend to use my larger tools for bulk removal, my smaller tools for cleaner cuts. Secure everything. One thing that I see quite often is people bringing that tool from the center out on a bowl. That's definitely a do not do. It'll get you in trouble almost every single time. It's a self-feeding cut, and as soon as you come around and hit that end grain, side grain, it's a scrape. At that point, you've hit an uneven grain surface, you're going to introduce vibration, you're going to introduce problems, and it'll get you into a catch very quickly. My speed remains the same thing, around 1125. This edge has a few little fibrous points sticking out on it, so that could be a potential place to slice me open if I bump my hand into it. I'll just soften that up just a little bit. My bevel pointed in the direction of cut, the flute's pointed away from me. Now, I moved that rest while I had the lathe running. You heard me bump the rest into the wood. Del Nish always told me that if I'm going to do that with the lathe running, sharpen the rest so that at least it cuts when I go in there. But the safe thing is to shut the lathe off and then move the rest. Handle up to level. Bevel pointed in the direction I want to go. Flute away from me. Left hand holds the tool onto the rest. The right hand steers. The wood's not turning very fast in that center. I need to let the wood come onto the tool. Just like on the green bowl, I'm going down about 1/3 of the way. Get a little bit more rim speed as that cut opens up, flows a lot better. As I go for my next step going down, I'm going to lower my rest a little bit. That'll give me a little bit of a shear angle at the tip of the tool in the bottom, instead of leaving me at a scrape. I'm leaving this a little bit thick for right now. I'm just getting the bulk of the wood out of the way. I don't want to go too thin, as I might have the rim move before I get a chance to shape what I want to do here. Okay, I've got my rim here, and I've got plenty of thickness. I want to start thinning this down. I'm going to switch over to my smaller gouge again, and I want that rim to dip in a little bit faster. I tend to like my rims flowing in as opposed to flowing out. Don't do that. No bevel support. That came in, touched. I had my flute a little bit open, and that was a legitimate catch or a skid right up the rim and left me a nice little spiral. Not bad, because it didn't get all the way out to where I'm going to be removing wood, so I need to take just a little bit, pick up the cut. Clean that up. Shut the lathe off for a second and check it. Looks like I've got it cut clean through there. Be more careful on the entrance. This time, up to level, flute closed. Getting close to my final cut here, pay extra close attention to the entry. Getting a little chatter on the piece, so my left hand comes off the tool, slides outside, very light pressure. I'm just supporting the outer part of the blank. It's gliding through my fingers. Most of us have a built-in thermostat for that. If your thermostat's not working by your hand getting hot when you're holding it on there, and you start smelling bacon, you're pushing way too hard. So that's just a very light, it's just resting on there. My hand didn't heat up at all. If you've got to pick up a handful of shavings or get a glove on to do that, you've got way too much bevel pressure on the cut, and that may be caused because you're way too thin down in the bottom here. Or a dull tool. Work slow and deliberate. There's no point in rushing that through there. Now, if you can flex that rim with your finger, and I can, you shouldn't be trying to cut on that anymore. That doesn't take a lot of pressure, and what's happening in that chatter is the wood is just trying to jump out of the way of that bowl, or the bowl gouge. Take your calipers, check your progress. And I'm fairly even. Got a tight curve right here, and then it starts to go flat. So I'm going to pick up my cut right in this point and then continue on and coming around. When you're filling that curve, get your whole hand in there, move it quick, not a finger, and slowly. Get your hand in there, fill it back and forth. My tight spot is right here just before it goes flat. Pick up my cut. That curve feels a lot better. Now I need to worry about this center mass of wood. I've lowered my rest again so that I can get to the bottom of that cut and have that tip at a 45-degree angle. Across the bottom right there, that's as wide as I open up the cut. I can barely see the red line in the bottom of my gouge. Because I'm sanding this piece, I'm going to leave that last little nub in the bottom. That'll sand out in about 3 seconds. If I cut across there and I go just a little bit past and go deep, I've got to make another cut from the rim to the base. So it's not worth that risk in order to get that extra little nub out of there. Let's get everything out of the way here. I'm going to put my banjo down towards the tailstock. Now we're going to power sand this piece here. If you don't power sand, you'll find that nothing improves your surface finish faster and better than power sanding. I highly recommend it. I don't like sitting here with sheet paper and taking 3-4 times longer to do it with sheet paper and then ending up with radial scratches running around there. The advantage that a power sander has is that it's cutting across the radial lines. And so you're cutting in 2 directions. Since I'm in an enclosed studio here and we don't have dust extraction, I'm going to coat this with a little scratch free in order to keep the dust down. Now you could also use, if you don't have a scratch free, whatever the first step in your finish protocol would be what you could put on here in order to cut the dust. Let's talk about grits, or sandpapers. And the one I've got an angled drill, and I've got a mandrel on there. This is hook and loop. And my abrasives have hook and loop. I'm going to start with 120 grit, move to 180 grit, then to 240 grit, and then end with 320. As you put your abrasives on your mandrel, give them a little squeeze and a little twist. That'll help keep them centered on your mandrel. If you don't have it centered on your mandrel, there's an extreme, but it's going to wear off half of that hook. And if you lose the sandpaper on there and put the mandrel right directly on there, the hook onto the wood, you'll lose that hook and loop in about 2 seconds. And it'll no longer grip your mandrels or grip your sandpaper. Speed, about half of what I was turning at. So about 500 RPM on here, where I was turning at about 1100. With this coarse grit, I'm going to stay away from the center for now. Now you can see some of these darker lines in here. Those are telling me where I haven't got the sandpaper yet. I'm looking for an even color and an even surface as I come across this with my sandpaper to let me know it's time to go to my next surface or my next grit. Keep the sander moving and in flowing arcs. If you hold it in one spot, it'll dig a hole and change your shape. As I do the rim, I come off of the piece, come to the rim, and sand the rim. I'm going to stop, look at that. I can see a couple of little spots right here in the end grain that are still not quite cut even with the sandpaper. With the lathe off, I'm going to take the back of my wrist from my left hand and support against the edge of that bowl so that it doesn't turn. And I'm going to spot sand that area using a low speed on my drill. And then do the same on the other side. Had I just kept sanding with that running, these areas that weren't cut are my end grain. They're the hardest surface. The areas that are cut are my side grain. They're the softest surface. So if I would have continued cutting, I would have actually thinned this out before I ever got to remove that much material in here. Now I want to blend it all together with the lathe running. On the outside of the bowl, I'm going to come around and tuck in side here. I've got the drill tucked down into my turning muscle. I'm using very light pressure on this. I didn't mention it earlier. And the other thing I didn't mention is I've got the sanding disc rotating in the opposite direction of the wood. So right here where I'm sanding here, the wood's going down, the drill, and I'm using the far side of the disc, is coming up. And I can hear my drill motor load down and slow down as I touch it to the wood. If it speeds up, you're cutting on the wrong side. Your drill should have a reverse on it and a variable speed. Just stop, look that surface over, see if there's anything that surprises me. Torn grain still in there or low spot. I seem to have got it. We're going to switch from 120 to 180. Lock that bit of abrasive on. Repeat the process. Now my lathe does have a reverse, and I will sometimes sand in reverse, but it is mostly on artistic pieces that I'm putting color to that I want a super fine finish on. Sanding my rim. And then back into the bowl. I'm feeling a little bit of bounce here. You can probably see it on camera. This bowl has moved. Even though it's dry wood, it's moved. Because as soon as I cut through all the center of that, I released the stresses that it had built up while it's drying. It's not going to move as much as a green bowl would, but it will move. I'm going to allow this sandpaper grit to come in a little bit tighter to that center. And even as dusty as this is, or appears, it's a lot better that I've got that wax on there than had I not. And I could put another coat on there. It wouldn't hurt a thing. I'm going to switch from 180 to 220. Now I've still got that little nub in the center. maybe 5 seconds it took to get rid of that, rather than the 3 I quoted earlier. Now, sometimes when you get through your 220, you'll start to see your tear out that you thought you got out of a piece before, or compression marks from the gouge. And this bowl appears to be, it appears that I've got that out of it earlier. I'll come back, do the outside. The outside, again, working from the base to the rim, getting a little bit of bounce there. If your bounce gets too severe, you can always slow down the rotation of the lathe. That won't hurt a thing. Get it barely rotating, if that's what you got to do to get past that bounce. It's better than not getting a good sanded finish. Back to about 500 revs. Don't sit and hover on that center, and I actually don't pass it. You look at that, I come up to it and then move out. You don't have a lot of surface area in there, and your sandpaper cuts very quick. There's also no end grain, it's all side grain. Now, I've been very cautious about not wiping that power sander over these edges. I'm going to take off my 320 grit and just kiss those corners. I want that to be crisp, but I don't want it to feel sharp. And if it feels sharp, that's not good. You want to let go of it. I can feel just a little torn grain still from where I scraped that earlier. I'm going to drop back to 220. That got it. Okay, now as far as a finish on this will be a utilitarian bowl, so I want something that is non-toxic. That's going to put me into things like walnut oils, vegetable oils, mineral oils, butcher block oils, things like that. If I want to protect the finish, then I might be dealing with more like water locks or general finish, salad bowl finish. Those are oil varnishes, and those I wouldn't be able to use this bowl right away. I'd need to wait for the solvents to dry in that piece of if I use those. I'm just going to use scratch free because I do know it is non-toxic, and that'll act as my final abrasive, and it'll also act as my finish. I'm going to take just a paper towel. And I'm going to work it into the surface of the wood. I still need to do some work on the back of the bowl. And just like we did on the twig pot, using a little friction, rub that in. Got a pretty little piece of wood there. Got some nice color, a couple of zone lines from the spalding, some little fiddleback in there. Now it's starting to pop up a little bit. Leaves us anxious to see what we're going to get when we finish this piece off on the bottom. First thing I'm going to do here is take a second and measure how much wood I've got in the bottom while I'm thinking about it. All right, this was about a bit of a three-handed operation with a caliper, but I'm going to hold my caliper in there, in the center, measure. I've got 15 and a half mil, and that tells me how thick I am right in the bottom. So I'm going to just take my pencil, write 15. I know that I've got probably 10 here in the wall, so I can only remove 5. But I know what I've done. That right now is just telling me what I've actually got to work with. My chuck is going to come off, and I'm going back to my screw center faceplate. We're going to make a jam chuck. And this will be a chuck that'll have a fit that I'll actually jam the bowl into. The material I've chose for this is just a sheet of MDF, medium density fiberboard. Mount that onto your screw chuck. Now that I've got my MDF mounted up, it's time for the hard part. Concentric circles on the blank so that I could get a rough idea on where to size the bowl to. I'm going to start the lathe, take my pencil, give myself some guidelines. That was the hard part. Take my bowl and hold it up there. I can see that largest line all the way around. I want to have a groove that's just slightly smaller than this outside line. So I'm going to give you a quick little visual of what we're doing here. I'm going to cut a trough or groove into this piece of MDF. I'll start with my diamond parting tool, remove some of this wood. I want this wall, when I finish, it must be cylindrical. And then I'm going to bring my bowl and snap into that piece. If I've got this on a taper, my bowl won't snap in. And as soon as I start cutting, it's going to vibrate out. If I'm tapered the opposite direction and I've got a dovetail, the bowl goes in and then wobbles loose. So I want to have a cylindrical wall here. I'm going to start with my diamond parting tool. Now, MDF is pretty dirty, dusty stuff, but it works really good for this. It's inexpensive enough that you can use it. And in fact, a lot of turners go down to cabinet shops and try and get their offcuts because they're small enough that they can't be used for the cabinet shops, so they can buy them a lot more affordably than buying a full sheet and cutting it down. Myself, I'll use natural wood. I'm always drying platter blanks, so I'll pick up a platter and do my jam fit in a platter blank. We're going to start with the MDF here because it also leaves me an escape route. I've got a hole through the center. If I get a piece stuck into a platter blank, I may not want to drill a hole all the way through the platter blank. So let's come in, we'll take our diamond parting tool, come in and plunge into this MDF. I'm going to stop. I want to see that pencil line when I'm done. Standard tool rest height. Just come in. Up to about 1,000 RPMs, 1,100. I want this groove wider than my rim. Now that I've cut this groove, I'm going to check the fit. I'm nowhere near that pencil line with that groove, and I still need to open that up. So I'll come in, make another cut. That should get me close, but I don't expect to fit into that. I'm going to come in one more time and I'm going to put a really savage taper. I don't need that MDF shavings in my bowl. They don't taste that good anyway. Okay, I am just inside of the taper that I cut. So now all I need to do is square that surface up. The parting tool is a very harsh tool to do that with. I want something that's going to give me a little bit more control. I'm going to switch to my skew, and I'm going to turn my rest what looks to be very awkward. Maybe just moving it's the awkward part. But I'm going to bring my skew in from this direction. And that way I've got a lot of control on how much material I take off there. You need to remember, for every 1/16 of an inch you take off of this side, you take off of the same amount over here. So that would open up 1/8 of an inch. Plunge cutting, I don't have that fine of control. So if I come in and scrape this surface, I do have very fine control. I'm squaring that shoulder up like we discussed earlier. And I'm going to stop just shy of where my chamfer or my taper is. And I can see that from the dust hanging up on it. And I'm going to check my fit one more time. Now, even though this was dry wood, it has relaxed and it's moved, and we discussed that a little bit. So I want to take and line my grain up and put the end grain in first, and then check and see how tight I am, because I'm going to compress this down to where it actually goes back into the round. That's not the sound that I want to hear. Just tap that with the blade of your tool. Just tap the chuck with the blade of your tool. Causes a little vibration and that pops out. So if I would have been turning on that little bit of vibrations, all that would have taken to pop that piece loose. That's not good. We don't want to have that piece come out on us. So back to my skew, I need just a little bit more room in there. Make sure you don't have any dust in the chuck or around the rim of your piece. Either of those will hold things up. I'm listening, I want to hear a nice little snap when this goes into place. Just like that. Now, if you overshot this groove and you made it a little bit too big, you can always take super glue and glue that in. Don't do that. I know somebody's gonna try that as soon as I say that. You'll ruin the bowl trying to get that off. I wouldn't glue that in, but I could take a piece of paper towel and put in between and use as a jam fit. One sheet of paper towel. If you put two, they slide on each other. You could also go back to and take your masking tape and put one wrap of masking tape around the rim. Don't overlap it because that doubles up your thickness right there. Again, two pieces of masking tape will slide on themselves also. I prefer not to have to put the paper towel or the masking tape in. I prefer to have a good fit. You are allowed one wrap of masking tape and one paper towel if you need to tighten that up. But if you can get that, you sneak up on this, you'll learn it very quickly and have very good success with it. This piece should be running true on there, and it is. If it's not running true, then you want to stop and find out why. It doesn't hurt to give it a couple of little bumps. Just make sure it's seated. And I measured on this earlier, and I have 15 mils thickness. My rim, I can take 5, 6. I should be able to take this tenon off of there and come out with a very good thickness on the bottom of this bowl and be right where I want to be. My tailstock, I'm going to bring up and put back on there. I'm not going to force that in. I want to know how good of a hold I've got on here, so I do leave it just a touch loose. That way, if my bowl wants to wobble and come out, it'll catch that revolving center and won't hit the floor. So I'm using it more of a safety net than as a device to hold it in place. You can see that that center's not really engaged. I can stop it with my finger. It's just there in place. Using my shearing peel cut hand or my shear scrape, handle down, flute closed. Same cuts that we used when we started the bowl. I'm going to come in and try to be somewhat aggressive here, because if this chuck's not going to hold, I want to know it very early on. I don't want to know it when I'm doing the finishing cuts and don't have my tailstock. That foot looks a little bit large in diameter to me. I am going to leave a little bit of a reverse curve on that. cut a slight undercut. I want to make sure this surface is slightly concave. Could use just a little bit more. I'm going to go to my little 3/8 spindle gouge just for a smaller tool. Anchor, bevel, pick up the cut. Pay attention to your ABCs here. This is not the time that you want to forget your bevel and have that pick up the cut and have that skate up the side of the bowl. I'll start working some of this material away now that I've got a smaller tool. That nub is about 7 to 8 mils long. I had 15, so that tells me that I've got about that much wood left in the bottom of this bowl. That's right where I want to be. That revolving center, I backed it off just a little bit. Everything seems secure. And we'd tested that before, making some heavier cuts. If you're not comfortable at this point in feeling if this is secure, a good handy little tip is some stretch wrap. And you can stretch wrap this right to the chuck. It will not substitute for a bad fit, but it will keep your piece from bouncing across the floor. I then take a piece of masking tape and tape this end down to keep it from wanting to come loose a little bit with centrifugal force. It won't come undone to the point where you lose the bowl, but it will come undone to the point where it'll startle you. I don't believe I need this, but I just wanted to let you see how I do that, and one of the possibilities for holding that on. Another possibility would be the fiber reinforced packaging tape. Masking tape itself doesn't have any strength, so that wouldn't work to hold that on there. The problem with the fiber reinforced tapes or duct tapes or anything like that, your tapes are going to leave a residue. The stretch wrap doesn't leave a residue on your finish that you got to worry about taking off later. The stretch wrap you can get, anybody that sells packaging supplies will have it. The big box office stores carry it. The big box hardware stores carry it for about half the price of the office supply stores. I'll lower my rest. And I am below standard tool rest height here, but I want to get a little bit better shear angle on the tool, on the work. And so I'm using a shear scrape or that peel cut to remove that nub. You notice I'm not pushing across that surface, and I didn't come in with my parting tool to get that off of there. I don't want to tear this out of the chuck. I'm trying to put my direction of force into that chuck, not across the chuck. Now, as I go and finish cleaning this a little bit up, anchor, bevel, cut, I do have the bevel intact or in place on there, and that helps. Feel that. Okay, now we're ready to sand. As I sand this, if I've got a little mismatch here on my surfaces, one from the piece maybe moved a little bit out around, or I'm a little bit deeper, I'll blend that together with sandpaper right here. I've got my same set of discs that I used earlier. Reduce your speed. Now to me, this is going to be much more comfortable to sand right here and right through here than it is to sand on this backside. So I'm going to go for the comfort. As I sand this bottom on here, I'm going to sand on the 3 to 4 o'clock side of my disc, traveling down through the 3 to 4 o'clock position on the wood, traveling up. As I sand here, I'm going to reverse my drill. I'm sanding about the 3 o'clock position on the pad going up and about the 8 o'clock position on the bowl coming down. Now I can see a little line right through here, a little color change, and that's right where I'd finish cutting to. And I'm going to try and blend those surfaces together. Now, that was my 120 grit. Look everything over. I don't see any tool marks left. 180 grit. Reverse my drill for the other side, for the bottom. .220 grit. Reverse my drill. And I keep bringing these up a little higher with each grit. Or sanding a little higher with each grit. Trying to blend things together. Then my 320. I'm going to sand that and blend that up a little higher than I did the 220. It's good practice to let your drill come to a complete stop before you reverse it, unlike I did on that last one, where I reversed it while it was still slightly moving. That'll tear up the insides. That's not good. That's poor production practices on my part. Burnish that in. Brought my speed up to 700 as I buff that in, just to get it to flow a little bit nicer. Now, if you want to have a couple of lines in the bottom, before I take that out of the chuck, now's here. Now's the time to do it. I didn't do it while I was tooling this and finishing off and doing all the tool work, because I would then possibly sand right through them. I want them to look nice, crisp, and clean. Again, I'm going to go with my skew laid down flat. And just a couple of subtle little lines. One works, you can balance one. Two works. If you put another one in there, you've got to have your spacing right on. That can be problematic. And if you do it from the center out, everybody thinks it's a bullseye, and you don't want people using your bowl for target practice. All right, a great way to get this bowl out of here is go back to that 3/4 inch drill bit with the Morse taper that we had earlier for our twig pot. Drill a hole through the bottom, then your finger fits in there and comes out, then you can get the bowl out of there pretty good. But then you've created a handcrafted funnel. Again, just like I did earlier, tap the rim of the jam chuck with your tool and cause a little vibration, and that bowl should come out. If that doesn't work and you really jam that in tight, you could unscrew it off your screw center and blow a little compressed air through this hole. That's one advantage of having the hole going all the way through the chuck. If you were on a piece of platter blank and you didn't want to drill a hole through the side, I could come back with my parting tool and cut a groove just to the side. That would keep me away from the rim of this piece, but it would loosen up the fit because it wouldn't have as much material to hold on to. Here's our finished bowl, all ready for you to use at breakfast in the morning. What we've learned is several techniques on the bowl gouge, to shape the bowl, to chuck it up, and we've also learned how to finish the bottom using the jam chuck.